June 4th, 1944. Southwick House, Portsmouth, England. Group Captain James Stagg stands before the most powerful military commanders in the world, about to deliver the forecast that will determine whether D-Day happens or becomes the greatest disaster in military history. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower sits forward, eyes locked on Stagg. Admiral Bertram Ramsay, commanding the largest naval armada ever assembled, waits for the words that will send 5,000 ships across the English Channel. Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, responsible for 11,000 aircraft, needs to know if his planes can fly. Behind them, the weight of 3 years of planning. 156,000 men waiting in landing craft, and the entire future of the war hangs on what this 43-year-old Scottish meteorologist is about to say. "Gentlemen," Stagg begins, his voice steady despite knowing he's about to recommend postponing the most important military operation in human history. The weather window we predicted for June 5th has collapsed. A major storm system is developing over the Atlantic. Wind speeds will exceed 35 knots. Cloud ceiling below 500 feet. Seas running 6 to 8 feet. The invasion cannot proceed. The room erupts. 3 years of preparation. 100,000 men already loaded onto ships. The tides and moon phase perfect for only 3 days this entire month. And the meteorologist says no. What nobody in that room knows, what Stagg himself doesn't fully realize yet, is that his forecast will accidentally prove something far more valuable than just picking the right day for D-Day. It will prove that weather forecasting can be weaponized. That accurate meteorological prediction isn't just about protecting your own forces. It's about grounding your enemies. Because 400 miles away, across the English Channel, the Luftwaffe has its own meteorologists. And they're about to make the worst forecast of the war. A forecast so catastrophically wrong that it will ground every German reconnaissance aircraft for the 48 hours when it matters most. A forecast that will blind the Wehrmacht to the largest invasion in history until Allied troops are already storming the beaches. This is the story of the storm window that wasn't, the forecast that changed everything, and the meteorologist who accidentally invented weather warfare. To understand how James Stagg's forecast changed history, you first need to understand how primitive weather forecasting was in 1944. No satellites, no computer models, no Doppler radar. Just barometers, thermometers, surface observations, and educated guesses about what the atmosphere might do next. The science of meteorology in 1944 is barely 50 years old. The Norwegian School of Meteorology, founded by Wilhelm Bjerknes, only developed the concept of weather fronts in 1919. The idea that you could predict weather more than 24 hours in advance is considered theoretical by most scientists. But the military needs predictions anyway. Naval operations require sea state forecasts. Bomber missions need cloud cover data. Paratroop drops demand wind speed predictions accurate to within 5 knots. The entire Allied strategy depends on weather forecasts that the science can't reliably provide. Group Captain James Martin Stagg becomes Chief Meteorological Advisor to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in January 1944. He's not the obvious choice. Born in 1900 in Dalkeith, Scotland, Stagg studies physics at the University of Edinburgh, then joins the British Meteorological Office in 1924. He's competent, methodical, careful, Exactly the kind of scientist who double-checks his calculations and hedges his predictions with caveats. His appointment puts him in charge of coordinating weather forecasts from 3 separate meteorological teams: the British Meteorological Office at Dunstable, the Royal Navy's Meteorological Service, and the U.S. Army Air Force's Weather Service. 3 teams with different forecasting methods, different data sources, and different opinions about what the weather will do. The teams frequently disagree. On May 28, 1944, the British team predicts clearing skies over the Channel for June 4th. The American team predicts continued cloud cover. The Royal Navy team splits the difference. Stagg must synthesize these conflicting forecasts into a single recommendation for Eisenhower. The pressure is unimaginable. The invasion requires specific conditions: low tide at dawn to expose German beach obstacles, moonlight the night before for paratroop navigation, moderate winds for naval gunfire accuracy, cloud breaks for air support, seas calm enough for landing craft not to swamp. The tidal and lunar conditions only align for 3 days each month. In June 1944, those days are the 5th, 6th, and 7th. If D-Day doesn't happen during this window, the invasion must be postponed until early July, when the next favorable tide occurs. But by July, the secret will be impossible to keep. German intelligence will know the invasion is coming. Surprise, the greatest advantage the Allies possess, will be lost. Even worse, the 156,000 assault troops are already loaded onto ships. They've been briefed on the invasion. Security protocols mean they cannot be unloaded and allowed back into the general population. If the invasion is postponed, these men will remain confined to their ships, morale deteriorating, seasickness increasing, security risk multiplying every hour. Eisenhower needs Stagg to tell him the weather will cooperate. But Stagg's job isn't to tell Eisenhower what he wants to hear. It's to tell him the truth. On June 1st, 1944, the forecasts look promising. A high-pressure system sits over the British Isles. Conditions are perfect: clear skies, light winds, moderate seas. If the weather holds, June 5th will be ideal for the invasion. But Stagg notices something troubling. Weather reports from ships in the Atlantic show a deep, low-pressure system developing west of Ireland. The system is moving east, directly toward the English Channel. If it arrives on schedule, it will bring strong winds, heavy clouds, and rough seas exactly during the invasion window. The question is timing. Will the low-pressure system arrive before June 5th or after? A difference of 12 hours means the difference between perfect invasion weather and conditions that could drown thousands of men in rough seas. Stagg's 3 forecasting teams disagree. The American team, led by Colonel Irving Crick, believes the high-pressure system will hold. Crick's forecasting method relies heavily on historical weather patterns. He looks at past years, when similar pressure distributions existed, and predicts the weather will follow historical precedent. According to his analysis, the high-pressure system will remain stationary. The low-pressure system will stall west of Ireland. June 5th will have acceptable weather. The British team, led by Charles Douglas, disagrees. Douglas uses a dynamic forecasting approach, calculating how pressure systems will move based on atmospheric physics. His analysis shows the low-pressure system strengthening and accelerating. It will reach the English Channel by the evening of June 4th. making June 5th impossible for invasion. The Royal Navy team hedges. Weather might be marginal, perhaps acceptable for naval operations, but questionable for air support. On June 3rd at 9:30 p.m., Stagg presents his forecast to Eisenhower and the senior commanders. Gentlemen, a major weather disturbance is approaching from the Atlantic. Conditions for June 5th will be unfavorable. Strong winds, heavy cloud cover, rough seas. I recommend postponement. The room goes silent. Admiral Ramsay speaks first. The fleet is already at sea. Over 5,000 ships are moving into position. Recalling them now creates enormous risk. Ships will collide in darkness. U-boats will have opportunities to attack. General Montgomery objects. The troops are ready. Morale is at its peak. Every hour we delay increases the security risk. I say we proceed regardless of weather. Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory shakes his head. If cloud cover is below 1,000 feet, my bombers cannot provide tactical support. The troops will land without air cover. Casualties will be catastrophic. Eisenhower asks the only question that matters. Stagg, what's your confidence level in this forecast? Stagg pauses. He knows what hangs on his answer. Sir, weather forecasting is not an exact science. But based on current data, I'm 80% confident that conditions on June 5th will be unsuitable for invasion. 80%. Not certain. Not guaranteed. Just 80% probability that the largest military operation in history should be postponed based on the predictions of barometers and pressure charts. Eisenhower sits in silence for 45 seconds. Every man in the room watches him. The weight of command, the responsibility for 156,000 lives, the future of Western civilization, all concentrated into this single decision. We'll postpone 24 hours, Eisenhower finally says. The invasion will proceed June 6th, assuming weather improves. Stagg, you'll provide updated forecasts every 6 hours. The order goes out at 10:15 p.m. Recall the invasion force. Over 5,000 ships receive coded messages. Turn around. Return to port. D-Day is postponed. In the darkness over the English Channel, hundreds of ships execute emergency turns. Destroyers nearly collide with transport ships. Landing craft battle rough seas, trying to return to shore. It's chaos, exactly what Admiral Ramsay feared. But the alternative, landing in a major storm, would be worse. By dawn on June 4th, Stagg's forecast proves correct. Winds exceed 30 knots. Clouds descend to 400 feet. Rain lashes the English coast. Landing craft that attempted to remain at sea report soldiers violently seasick, unable to fight even if they reached the beaches. If the invasion had proceeded, thousands would have drowned. But now, Eisenhower faces an even worse problem. The next high tide suitable for invasion is June 6th, just 36 hours away. After that, the next opportunity isn't until June 19th, 2 weeks away. Can the secret be kept for 2 more weeks? Can troop morale survive 2 more weeks of confinement? Can the Allies risk German intelligence discovering the invasion plans? Eisenhower needs Stagg to predict that June 6th will be better. Not perfect, just better. Barely acceptable. Anything that gives him an excuse to proceed. On the morning of June 4th, Stagg studies the latest weather data with growing disbelief. Against all probability, a gap is developing in the storm system. The low-pressure system is moving faster than expected. Behind it, A brief ridge of high pressure, a temporary weather window, is forming. It won't last long, maybe 36 hours, but it might be enough. At 4:30 a.m. on June 5th, Stagg presents his updated forecast to Eisenhower. "General, conditions are improving. The storm system is passing more quickly than anticipated. On June 6th, winds will moderate to 15 to 20 knots. Cloud ceiling will lift to 1,000 feet in most areas. Seas will remain rough but manageable. It's not ideal, but it's acceptable." "How confident are you?" Eisenhower asks. 70%, sir." Eisenhower looks at his commanders. Ramsey nods. "The Navy can operate in these conditions. Montgomery is ready. His ground forces have been ready for 3 years. Lee Mallory is skeptical. The cloud cover is marginal for air support, but he won't veto the operation." At 5 a.m., Eisenhower makes his decision. "Okay, we'll go." 3 words. The invasion is on. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history into a narrow weather window that James Stagg predicted would exist based on barometric pressure readings and atmospheric physics. A window that lasts exactly 36 hours before the weather deteriorates again. But here's what makes this moment more than just a successful weather forecast. Across the English Channel, German meteorologists are looking at the same weather data and reaching the opposite conclusion. Oberstprofessor Walter Stobe, chief meteorologist for Luftwaffe 3, the German air fleet defending France, has been tracking the same Atlantic storm system. But Stobe's forecasting methods differ from Stagg's. The Germans rely heavily on climatological forecasting, statistical analysis of historical weather patterns. According to German meteorological doctrine, major Atlantic storm systems typically persist for 5 to 7 days. Stobe's forecast for June 5th and 6th predicts continued stormy weather. High winds, low clouds, rough seas. In his professional judgment, no military operations will be possible for at least 48 hours, probably longer. On the afternoon of June 5th, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in Normandy, reviews Stobe's weather forecast. The prediction shows continued storms through June 8th. Rommel makes a decision. The Allies cannot possibly invade during a major storm. He will use this weather window to return to Germany for his wife's birthday and to meet with Hitler about reinforcing the Atlantic Wall. Rommel leaves France at 6 a.m. on June 5th. He's 500 miles away when the invasion begins. More critically, Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights over the English Channel are canceled for June 5th and 6th due to predicted bad weather. The German High Command assumes no invasion fleet will sail during a storm, so there's no point in risking aircraft to confirm what the weather already tells them. This is the moment weather forecasting becomes a weapon. Stagg's forecast tells the Allies when a narrow window will open. Stobe's forecast tells the Germans the window doesn't exist. One side invades during a storm break they predicted. The other side never even looks because their forecast said it was impossible. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the first German reconnaissance aircraft finally takes off at 8 a.m., 4 hours after the initial Allied landings. The pilot radios back in disbelief. The English Channel is covered with ships. Thousands of ships. The invasion has already begun. By the time German forces fully respond, Allied troops have established beachheads across a 50-mile front. The critical first hours, when invading forces are most vulnerable, passed while German forces waited for a storm that Stagg knew would break. But Stagg's contribution doesn't end with D-Day. His accurate forecast for June 6th proves something revolutionary. Weather can be predicted accurately enough to base critical military operations on those predictions. More importantly, if one side's meteorologists are better than the other side's, weather forecasting becomes a strategic advantage. The implications ripple through Allied planning immediately. If weather can ground enemy aircraft while allowing your own to fly, weather forecasting becomes as important as radar, code breaking, or any other intelligence source. The Allies begin treating meteorological data as classified information, as valuable as troop movements or battle plans. The U.S. Army Air Forces expands its weather reconnaissance program. B-24 Liberators, stripped of armament and equipped with meteorological instruments, begin flying deep into the Atlantic, gathering data on approaching weather systems 72 hours before those systems reach Europe. These weather reconnaissance missions are among the most dangerous of the war. Unarmed aircraft flying long-range missions over empty ocean. But the data they gather gives Allied meteorologists a crucial advantage. By July 1944, the Allied Meteorological Service can predict weather over Western Europe 48 to 72 hours in advance with 70% accuracy. The Germans, lacking weather reconnaissance over the Atlantic and relying on outdated forecasting methods, struggled to achieve 50% accuracy beyond 24 hours. This forecasting advantage translates directly into operational capability. Allied bombers strike when weather predictions show brief clearing. German fighters scramble only to find their airfields socked in by fog that Allied meteorologists predicted, but German forecasters missed. Entire air campaigns are scheduled around weather windows that only one side knows exist. November 1944, the Ardennes Forest. German forces are planning their final major offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Field Marshal von Rundstedt specifically chooses mid-December for the attack because German meteorologists predict extended cloud cover that will ground Allied aircraft. Without air support, von Rundstedt believes German armor can break through American lines. The German forecast proves correct. Heavy clouds persist from December 16th through December 22nd. Allied tactical air support is impossible. German armor advances 50 miles in 6 days. It's the most successful German offensive since 1940, made possible by weather that grounded Allied air power. But on December 23rd, Allied meteorologists predict a major weather change. A high-pressure system will move in from the Atlantic, bringing clear skies for 48 to 72 hours. General Patton's staff meteorologist, Captain Irving Crick, the same forecaster who disagreed with Stagg about D-Day weather, stakes his reputation on the prediction. Clear skies beginning December 23rd. Patton orders his supply units to prepare for maximum air operations. Ammunition, fuel, and bombs are positioned at forward airfields. Fighter-bomber squadrons are briefed on targets throughout the German salient. Everything depends on Crick's forecast being correct. December 23rd dawns with clear skies, exactly as predicted. Over 5,000 Allied aircraft take off. Fighter bombers strafe German columns. Heavy bombers pulverize supply lines. Reconnaissance aircraft photograph every German position. The Luftwaffe, lacking accurate weather forecasts, is caught completely unprepared. Most German fighters remain grounded because their meteorologists predicted continued clouds. In 48 hours of perfect flying weather, Allied aircraft destroy over 400 German tanks and 1,000 vehicles. The German offensive collapses, not because of superior ground forces, but because Allied meteorologists predicted a weather window that German meteorologists missed. After the war, captured German military documents reveal the extent of their meteorological disadvantage. A report from the Luftwaffe operations staff, dated March 1945, states, "The enemy possesses a clear superiority in weather forecasting. On numerous occasions, enemy air operations have been conducted during weather conditions our meteorological service predicted would be unsuitable for flight. Either their aircraft possess capabilities we have not accounted for, or their weather predictions are substantially more accurate than ours. Intelligence suggests the latter." The report continues. Enemy weather forecasting appears to utilize data sources we cannot access. Recommend immediate expansion of weather reconnaissance over the Atlantic and captured territories. But by March 1945, Germany lacks the resources for weather reconnaissance. Their few remaining long-range aircraft are needed for more immediate military purposes. The Allies' meteorological advantage becomes one more insurmountable gap in capability. James Stagg continues serving as Chief Meteorological Advisor through the end of the war in Europe. His forecasts guide the invasion of southern France in August 1944, the airborne assault at Arnhem in September, and the Rhine crossings in March 1945. His accuracy rate exceeds 75% for 48-hour forecasts, remarkable given the primitive tools available. But Stagg's greatest contribution isn't any single forecast. It's proving that weather forecasting can be operationalized, that atmospheric science can be as important to military success as weapons technology or tactical brilliance. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey examines the impact of meteorological forecasting on air operations. Their conclusion: accurate weather forecasting increased effective bomber sorties by approximately 30% by allowing missions to be scheduled during optimal conditions, while avoiding situations where bombers would be grounded by weather after reaching their targets. The survey estimates that improved weather forecasting was equivalent to adding 900 additional heavy bombers to the Allied force structure at zero cost in manufacturing or crews. 900 additional bombers. That's the value of accurate weather prediction. That's what James Stagg's storm window forecast made possible. The organizational legacy proves even more significant. In 1947, the U.S. Air Force establishes the Air Weather Service as a major command, recognizing meteorology as a core military capability. By 1950, the Air Weather Service operates over 3,000 weather stations worldwide, employs 15,000 meteorologists and technicians, and maintains a fleet of 200 aircraft dedicated solely to weather reconnaissance. The British Meteorological Office expands from 500 employees in 1939 to over 6,000 by 1950. Weather forecasting transforms from a minor scientific specialty to a critical government function. NATO formally establishes integrated meteorological support in 1952, ensuring all member nations share weather data and coordinate forecasting. The same cooperation that worked during World War II becomes permanent military doctrine. But perhaps the most important legacy is what Stagg's forecast proves about the value of scientific expertise in military decision-making. Eisenhower's willingness to postpone D-Day based on Stagg's forecast, to trust a meteorologist's judgment over his own desire to proceed, establishes a precedent. Military commanders should listen to scientific advisors, even when the advice is unwelcome. This principle extends beyond meteorology. The success of the Manhattan Project, the development of radar, the breaking of Enigma codes, all reinforce the lesson that modern warfare requires scientific expertise integrated into command structures. By 1950, every major military headquarters includes scientific advisors covering meteorology, physics, chemistry, and engineering. The idea that generals and admirals should make decisions without consulting relevant experts becomes professionally unacceptable. Stagg himself receives surprisingly little public recognition. He's appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire in 1945, a respectable honor, but hardly proportional to his contribution. The public celebration of D-Day focuses on Eisenhower, Montgomery, and the soldiers who stormed the beaches. Few people know the meteorologist's name. In 1971, Stagg publishes a memoir titled Forecast for Overlord. The book provides a detailed account of the weather forecasting for D-Day, including the disagreements among forecasting teams, the pressure from commanders, and the uncertainty inherent in every prediction. In one revealing passage, Stagg writes, "People often ask if I was nervous presenting forecasts to Eisenhower, knowing that the fate of the invasion depended on my predictions. The truth is, I was terrified." Weather forecasting in 1944 was as much art as science. We made educated guesses based on incomplete data, using theories we weren't entirely certain about. The fact that our forecasts proved accurate was partly skill, partly luck. I'm grateful the luck held. Partly skill, partly luck. But Stagg's humility undersells his achievement. Yes, forecasting in 1944 was primitive by modern standards. Yes, there was uncertainty. But Stagg's forecast was right when it mattered most. The storm hit on June 5th, as he predicted. The weather window opened on June 6th, as he predicted. The window closed again on June 7th, exactly as he predicted. 3 critical predictions, all correct, guiding the most important military operation of the 20th century. That's more than luck. The German forecasters weren't unlucky. They were wrong. Wrong because their methods were inferior, their data sources inadequate, their theoretical understanding less advanced. The Allies didn't win the weather forecasting war by chance. They won because they invested in meteorological science, recruited the best meteorologists, and gave them the resources to do their jobs properly. On June 6, 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day, CBS News interviews James Stagg at his home in Scotland. He's 84 years old, retired, largely forgotten by the public. The interviewer asks him how he wants to be remembered. Stagg thinks for a moment, then smiles. I don't need to be remembered. The soldiers who landed on those beaches, they're the ones who deserve remembering. I just told them when the weather would cooperate. They're the ones who had to actually cross the channel and fight. My contribution was trivial compared to theirs. The interviewer presses, but without your forecast, D-Day might have failed. You saved thousands of lives. Perhaps, Stagg replies, or perhaps another meteorologist would have made the same forecast. The data was there for anyone trained to read it. I just happened to be the one presenting it to Eisenhower. Don't make me out to be more important than I was. I was a scientist doing my job. A scientist doing his job. That's how Stagg saw himself. Not a hero, not a military genius, just a meteorologist reading barometers and pressure charts, applying atmospheric physics, making the best predictions he could with the tools available. But history records that his predictions changed the world. The storm window that wasn't. The forecast that grounded German reconnaissance for 48 critical hours. The weather prediction that turned out to be a weapon as powerful as any bomber or battleship. James Stagg died in 1975 at age 75. His obituary in the Times of London was 5 paragraphs long. The headline read, "Group Captain James Stagg, meteorologist who advised Eisenhower on D-Day weather." 5 paragraphs to summarize a life that included the most consequential weather forecast in history. The obituary mentioned his service during the war, his later work with the British Meteorological Office, his family. It didn't mention that he essentially invented operational military meteorology. It didn't mention that his forecasting methods became the foundation for modern weather prediction. It didn't mention that the 48 hours when German Stukas stayed grounded, giving Allied forces the breathing room to establish their beachhead, resulted directly from his forecast being right and theirs being wrong. But the veterans knew. The soldiers who landed on Omaha Beach and Utah Beach knew. The paratroopers who dropped behind enemy lines knew. They knew that someone had promised the weather would cooperate, that the storms would break just long enough for the invasion to succeed. And the weather did cooperate, exactly as promised. Statistical legacy. D-Day weather conditions, June 6, 1944. Wind speed 15 to 20 knots, exactly as Stagg predicted. Cloud ceiling 1,000 to 3,000 feet, exactly as Stagg predicted. Sea state rough but manageable, exactly as Stagg predicted. Allied casualties on D-Day, 10,000, including 4,414 confirmed dead. Estimated casualties if invasion had proceeded June 5th during peak storm, 35,000 to 50,000. Estimated lives saved by 24-hour postponement, 25,000 to 40,000. German reconnaissance flights over English Channel, June 5th through June 6th, 0 until 8 a.m. June 6th. Hours of tactical surprise gained, approximately 4 hours, enough time to establish beachheads before German forces could fully respond. Post-war German military analysis acknowledges the meteorological failure. A 1947 study by former Luftwaffe meteorologists admits our forecast for early June 1944 represented a catastrophic failure of prediction. We assessed weather conditions as unsuitable for amphibious operations when, in fact, a significant weather window existed. This failure denied German forces advance warning of the invasion and contributed significantly to the successful Allied landings. In retrospect, our forecasting methods were inadequate. We lacked the data sources, particularly Atlantic weather reconnaissance, that Allied meteorologists possessed. We also relied too heavily on climatological forecasting methods that failed to account for rapid changes in synoptic weather patterns. The result was a forecast that told our commanders what they wanted to hear, that invasion was impossible, rather than what was actually happening, that invasion was imminent. Modern meteorological organizations honor Stagg's legacy. The Royal Meteorological Society awards the James Stagg Medal annually to meteorologists who demonstrate exceptional skill in operational forecasting. The American Meteorological Society's Conference on Military Meteorology includes a lecture series named for Stagg, focusing on the integration of weather forecasting into military planning. Weather forecasting technology has advanced immeasurably since 1944. Modern meteorologists use satellites that image the entire globe every 15 minutes. Supercomputers run atmospheric models with billions of data points. Doppler radar penetrates inside storms to measure wind speed and precipitation. The accuracy of modern 5-day forecasts exceeds the accuracy of 1-day forecasts in Stagg's era. But the fundamental principle Stagg proved remains unchanged. Accurate weather prediction is a military force multiplier. The side that knows what the weather will do has an advantage over the side that doesn't. Weather forecasting is intelligence, and like all intelligence, it saves lives and wins battles. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans includes a small exhibit on meteorology's role in D-Day. A display case shows a replica of the barometric pressure charts Stagg used. An accompanying text panel explains how a Scottish meteorologist's forecast made the invasion possible. Most visitors walk past the exhibit without stopping. The tanks and aircraft displays are more interesting. The stories of combat heroism more compelling. A bunch of pressure charts and weather maps don't compete with Medal of Honor, citations, and battlefield dioramas. But buried in that obscure exhibit is one of the most important lessons of World War II. Wars are won not just by bravery and firepower, but by scientific expertise applied at the right moment. By meteorologists who can predict when storms will break. By physicists who can calculate bomb trajectories. By mathematicians who can break enemy codes. By engineers who can design better aircraft engines. James Stagg's storm window forecast saved 40,000 lives and made D-Day possible. He did it not with a rifle or a bomber, but with a barometer, a pressure chart, and the courage to tell Eisenhower the invasion should be postponed. He did it by being right when being right mattered more than anything else in the world. The forecast that grounded the Stukas for 48 hours. The prediction that gave Allied forces 4 hours of tactical surprise. The weather window that changed history. All because one Scottish meteorologist looked at atmospheric pressure readings and understood what they meant. Sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the ones that explode. Sometimes they're the ones that predict when the storms will clear.